Welcome back to Gaming with Spoons. I want to get in and talk today what Square Enix needs to do with Final Fantasy XVI. Because let's face it, most gamers will tell you that the last great Final Fantasy game was with Final Fantasy X. I would argue that Final Fantasy XII definitely kinda ended the great Final Fantasy games, as I thought that game was just awesome in every way. Despite its battle system maybe being a little bit of a mixed bag, I definitely really enjoyed that game's plot and its story, and its overall themes. Final Fantasy XIII, on the other hand, a lot of fans ended up being disappointed. Now, I don't think 13 in any way, shape, or form is a bad game, but it's definitely not one of the most outstanding games in the franchise, that is for sure. Final Fantasy XV, on the other hand, felt incomplete, it felt rushed, it really felt like Square Enix was trying to push that out the door at a quick deadline just to get it out. Needless to say, with the cancelled DLC and the story now feeling incomplete and many gamers upset, I do think that Square Enix definitely needs to steer their direction back on the right track, make sure that they nail the Final Fantasy VII Remake as well as Final Fantasy XVI. I think many fans, myself included, are anticipating what they're going to do to try and win back consumer trust. So I really want to break down the essentials of what Square Enix needs to do and then kind of add in my own opinion. So let's go ahead and start with the essentials. First and foremost, Square Enix needs to assemble a team of talent. And I'm not saying that the new people there or some of the newer blood in there doesn't have talent, but when it comes to the writing department and who's helming the director chair, I really feel like that they need to go after individuals who kind of know what they're doing. The first person that comes to mind is Kazushige Nojima, and I'm probably butchering his name, but I'm trying. And I've got to say that Nojima-san is known for working on the Final Fantasy franchise already. He was one of the main scenario writers for Final Fantasy VII. He has also worked on Final Fantasy X. I believe he was the story writer for Final Fantasy X. He scribed the original script for Versus 13, which some of its assets were used in Final Fantasy 15. I don't think that's really something we can hold against him because that plot was butchered to hell and back to make it available for Final Fantasy 15 anyways. But the man clearly has talent, and he's been behind some of the most influential stories that Final Fantasy has been able to tell. Now, I believe that Ito and I want to say Yoshinori Kitase, as well as Hironobu Sakaguchi, had worked on Final Fantasy VI together as kind of a collabed effort to bring that game together. As much as I'd like to see Yoshinori Kitase return to the director's chair, I think he's too busy up there with dealing with producer and corporate business to really step down and take that direction, though it may be beneficial for him to step up into the chair. When I uploaded my video talking about DLC, there was another man that I couldn't think of, and one of the people who viewed my video, thank you again, brought this director to my attention, but this was Hiroyuki Ito. Now, Hiroyuki Ito is a very interesting individual because if we take a look at his record here, we can going on Wikipedia, we can clearly see some of the things that he has worked on for Final Fantasy. And we can see that he was the director, or he is known as one of the directors of Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy IX, and Final Fantasy XII. Now, despite some people giving the 9 and 12 some harsh criticism, I think he'd be great to helm the director's chair, especially given his take, and maybe even getting like some people in there who knew what they were doing. Now, Ito is also known for, I believe he did create the active time battle system, which the Final Fantasy series has kind of became a staple of. As for him directing, I can't think of anybody else to really be able to do it. He clearly proved very successful with Final Fantasy IX, because that is my favorite Final Fantasy game, and I'm not the only one who thinks that one was very, very good, despite some small little annoyances people had with the final boss and a couple of other things. Overall, Final Fantasy IX was a wonderful game. But Get him and Nojima together, I definitely think that that would be a recipe for success. Now, I do want to make mention of a particular other person who could work with them in regards to that, is Masato Kato. Masato Kato was known for his work on not Final Fantasy. He worked a little bit on Xenogears. He was more notably known for working on Chrono Cross, as well as working on Chrono Trigger. Those were essentially kind of his babies during Square, and Masato Kato is actually an extremely good writer. I would love to be able to see him return to Square and work on them with another game as of yet. I mean, again, he is a freelance writer, doesn't necessarily work for Square, but he has showed interest in returning to Square and helping out some IPs, so why not get him back on board? I think those three working together could make for a very interesting concept when it came to Final Fantasy. Now, I want to shift focus onto the composer, because let's face it, as much as we love Nobuo Uematsu, and that Nobuo Uematsu, for one, kind of wanted to move on from Final Fantasy. I think we have seen some of his elements, and I still think 13's music was okay. I mean, I can't remember the guy's name. I want to say Masashi or something like that. He was really, really good with composing some music, but again, I think a lot of people really took notice that it wasn't Nobuo Uematsu in Final Fantasy XIII. Yoko Shimamuro, on the other hand, did an amazing job composing Final Fantasy XV. I think we have to accept the fact that Nobuo Uematsu isn't returning, especially considering that he has essentially stepped away from being a music composer to take care of his health. I hope everything works out there fine and he is able to make 100% recovery, because that man is a legend in the video game industry. But Yoko Shimamuro, I feel, is a definite great candidate to be able to compose music for the game. Even if they were to do a collaboration effort with another composer that I feel might potentially do it, as he has worked on some other titles, I would love to see Yasunori Mitsuda return to the composing chair. Those of you who are not familiar with who Yasunori Mitsuda is, he has gone in and done such titles as Xenogears, Chrono Cross, and Chrono Trigger. The man's composing pieces speak for themselves. He's really great at what he does and makes some absolute masterpieces when it comes to composing. I think him and Shimamuro would work very well. Wouldn't be the first time they've worked together, as they also did work together on elements of Xenoblade Chronicles for the Wii. But that's kind of the essential steps that I definitely think that they need to take. They need to be able to nail that music, get the story, and get a developer that is able to crack the whip and get things going. I also think that to some respect, they definitely do need to have a seasoned team who at least knows how to deal with the engines and not get a bunch of new hires and new people thrown into this team that they need to train how to work these assets to kind of help push development along. Now, let's break down where I think Final Fantasy XVI could take the franchise to definitely succeed. Let's get the elephant out of the room first and just talk about returning to a turn-based battle system. Returning to a turn-based battle system for a lot of fans would definitely be very much appreciated. I find myself sitting on the fence with this particular system. I wouldn't really mind if they went more actionized like they did in Final Fantasy XV. Again, maybe learn from some of the mistakes that Final Fantasy XV made and refine the battle system mechanics. Maybe get somebody in there who knows how to work on more actionized battle mechanics to begin with. And I really feel like they need to get someone in here who kind of knows what they're doing with that, so they, can season it out a little bit more. Now, what I want to talk about with in regards to the battle system being turn-based, could this potentially happen? Yes. And like I said, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Either way, I could see it going either way. But I do feel like that there is very much a potential there to have a great turn-based battle system. I mean, we've seen such games as Dragon Quest VIII come along and still can have a battle system. I mean, we're talking turn-based, let's talk Persona 5. A game by any means that I don't think anybody realized a turn-based RPG could do so well in 2018. But yet here Persona 5 came in with its turn-based battle system and pretty much blew everybody away. Now granted, Final Fantasy VIII sold, I believe it was about 9 million copies, or Final Fantasy XV sold about 9 million copies. Persona 5, I want to say was roughly around 5 million. So not a huge difference, but definitely huge enough to set the precedence that action combat's probably going to attract more people. And, I said, whatever, it is what it is, and Square Enix can go either way. I think either way you're going to end up alienating some people. So either way, I wouldn't care, but I do think for the sake of evolving the series, it would probably be more beneficial to go an action combat system. I know that's a little controversial to say, but I really do think that that's probably the best direction that Square Enix could potentially go. Now, if we're talking about other things that Square Enix, I guess one thing I should say, this is more essential than anything they need to do, is cut the crap with the other media. Don't make any more movies, don't make any more animes, don't make any more DLC that cuts the story into pieces and takes out essential plot points to pass off as your story. I think that ends up being detrimental to your plot. Final Fantasy XV, I think that was one of its worst flaws. What was there was a great concept for a story, but it needed more time to flesh itself out. It needed more room to be able to go in and tell its piece. And unfortunately, we didn't get that with Final Fantasy XV, as we're not going to, because the original Season Pass was just completely cancelled. Now, there is a way to do DLC, I feel like, and I'm going to use Final Fantasy VI here as a prime example. Let's take the character Locke, for instance, in Final Fantasy VI. You have the main quest, the main story that kind of unfolds as, Locke, Terra, Edgar, Sabin, and all of them go on their journey. They kind of meet together, but each of these characters kind of have their own backstory interwoven into the plot. And while the game, like say Final Fantasy VI, definitely focuses on each of those particular elements about what happened to those characters, what about maybe releasing DLC that expands that story a little bit, or gives us a little bit more information, say, into Locke's backstory and what happened between him and Rachel? Or if we're talking, we have Daryl and Setzer, who they could really, really hit home with a more interesting DLC by just expanding on those characters a little bit and maybe showing the relationship that those two had. I feel there's a really great way to be able to use DLC to expand the story without necessarily taking away from the story. Again, I actually love DLC in video games when developers use it to expand and not take away. It's when they chop something out and resell it to us that I have a problem with DLC. Now, something else I do think that Square Enix needs to do, or should do, I guess my personal preference, is take it back to more of a medieval setting. Go back to the series' roots. It's not that I don't mind the fantasy or the sci-fi elements in Final Fantasy. It's not that I don't mind the steampunkish kind of modern feel that Final Fantasy XV took. It was definitely a nice change of pace, but I would love to see Square Enix return the series almost to where it got its start. Even starting it out with something more Final Fantasy IX and moving it more into a sci-fi-ish kind of world could be interesting in a lot of ways, but I really think they need to pay homage to what the series originally set itself upon and definitely make it more medieval. And I feel like there's some really great ways that they could go in and do that. As for some of the other things I personally would like to see, I think that, if anything, I think Final Fantasy could benefit from taking a little bit more of a darker turn. Reintroduce more character death. Now, we already know Final Fantasy VII is pretty much ingrained into pop culture, but there are other moments in the Final Fantasy franchise. I'm not going to spoil those here, but there are other moments in the Final Fantasy franchise where characters have died. And I also feel like that leaves an impact on the player, and I really think Final Fantasy could benefit more from those particular scenes. So, something to consider there. As for anything else, I think Square Enix just needs to really kind of set themselves away from topping Final Fantasy VII. I think that's always the thing that there's always constantly on their head. Oh, we're going to make the next big game that's just going to blow Final Fantasy VII out of the water. Stop trying to top it, and just let the passion of your development team kind of craft the project. And sometimes, more often than not, projects that are made of pure passion are the ones that become complete examples of just being amazing, rather than ones that try to force themselves into following in the footsteps of something else. That's just kind of the direction that I think Final Fantasy XVI needs to go, but I want to hear down below what you think Final Fantasy XVI needs to do in the future. What do you think Square Enix needs to do with Final Fantasy 16 to succeed? Because Square Enix still has really talented individuals there whom I don't think are getting enough limelight or spotlight to do much. And I do think by giving some of these directors a chance, or these other people the chance to step up to the plate and do amazing things with the franchise, that Final Fantasy can find that spark that it definitely once had. But Square Enix needs to learn to manage their company a little bit better, manage their assets a little bit better, and get directors and a team that can work together, I think, rather than against. And we can have a bit of success, because I really think, despite some of the shortcomings that they've done, Square Enix is starting to get in a better place than they were. Give or take, there's definitely going to be some hiccups with some companies, but yeah, it is what it is. Comments down below, hit subscribe there for me to keep up to date with all of my content, so you can check out other videos like this. And follow me on Facebook and Twitter, links down below in that description box. And most importantly, stay happy, be happy, game happy. Spoons is checking out.